Yo, Raf. I did a little paint over for you, and I'm just gonna talk over what I painted over, just so you have a better idea or understanding of what I feel like you could do better and what I feel is pretty good in your painting so far. So what I think you did well was the pose is pretty solid, and your understanding of anatomy is pretty decent. Like, you clearly understand how the arms work. Although I'd say like maybe the structure needs a little work. You asked me about how to make the rendering more appealing, and I personally feel like you're focusing on the wrong issues. It's true that rendering can make your paintings look a lot more appealing, but I think rendering is like a little kind of trick almost to add to an already solid painting. I'm not saying that your painting isn't good necessarily, but I'm saying that it's lacking a lot of fundamental things you should figure out before you move to the rendering stage in your painting. For example, I feel like your lighting setup isn't very clear where it's coming from, like what direction. The arms look like the lighting is almost coming from the upper right corner, whereas the face looks like it's coming from the upper left. And also another thing with exposure. So it feels like you're exposing for a lot of the light areas, which means the shadow, the darker shapes are just, they look like a graphical shape almost. And it's really hard to add details to something, like in terms of rendering, right? It's really hard to add details when everything is like pitch black. So to remedy this, we can, sorry, did I say expose for the light or shadow? This is exposing for the shadow. Basically, you're making everything too dark. And so you're supposed to see the details in the light more. And so the blade, right, has a lot of opportunity to show detail, but it's because it's pitch black. Or like the shoulder pads, they just look very unappealing because they're just one black shape. There's not much. I can see you use like some texture or whatever, but it's like very, very I guess subtle and simple to almost to the point where it like doesn't matter. But besides the exposure thing, I think the main thing I wanted to touch on is the structure. So the way you painted it was that you implied that, let me just go back to the thing. It feels like you implied that the blade is a lot thicker. Like the bottom here feels almost like a rectangle. It feels like you didn't fully figure this area out before finishing it, and it makes this blade look like this lighter part is like almost the width of the blade, which obviously that wouldn't make sense because blades aren't that wide. So just by clarifying how the base structure works, I'm not too familiar with Final Fantasy, so I just kind of googled the closest blade that Cloud uses. I don't know, it looks similar, so I just used that as reference. And I feel like there are certain areas where it doesn't feel fully accurate to the design, so I just worked a little bit on that. When it comes to shading metals, there are metals that are more matte and more reflective, but for his blade, for example, the darker area is super matte, and they both look matte in the 3D model that I use, but out of I guess stylization, you can choose to make a certain material more reflective than the other, and it will feel more I guess it'll pop out more and it'll feel more realistic because there's a variety in material reflectivity. It shows a good understanding. I'm mainly just noodling here and not much, and then I brighten the overall lightness of his blade, because when you do that, there's a lot more opportunity to show texture. Like because it was so dark earlier, it's impossible to like add detail where you want. So since you asked about rendering, here's one of the solutions you could go with, which is creating a sort of a better environment for that. And to make this lighter, we need to make sure that the entire lighting setup, which I mentioned earlier, is consistent, right? So because I wasn't sure how this is supposed to be lit because these lights feel a little conflicting, I kind of started adding my own light source, you'll see later on. But for now, I'm just kind of painting in the basic, just brightening the blade. And because it's bright now, I have opportunities to add darker textures. And this, if you're curious what brush this is just scratchy metal. It should be in my brush pack. I don't know. It's probably linked somewhere in my YouTube. I don't know if you already have it. But now I'm thinking of how can I add another source of highlight so that I can add more texture to the blade. So if there's a rim light or light coming from behind him, that's another opportunity for us to add texture. And what I just did there, I mean, it happened really quickly, but I lowered the brightness of the highlight on the dark blade, not only because it has a darker local value, but I want to show that it's more matte than this brighter part of the blade. And I think this material differentiation adds a lot of believability to the thing. Now, I know it's not perfect necessarily, but I'm just showing you really quickly like how you can go about rendering it. And here are just some tiny things you can do to add more detail. Like, especially now that we have a really bright place, there's even more opportunity to add areas of detail, right? Another thing is to keep the character feeling like it's consistent. We need to make sure the light is affecting the entire body so that everything feels like it's part of the same environment. I think that's something that your initial painting didn't have enough of. And so that's potentially something you can work on. Another thing I'd like to just quickly comment on, this is like the end of the paint over, is this this separation between the blade. Like I see you use the airbrush trick that, like, you know, illustrators use. I think you also need to be careful how strong you use it, and also the color you use, because right now it's so bright it doesn't really make sense. It almost feels like he has a glowing dick or something, you know what I mean? So definitely, like, usually when you have this, it's a color from the environment, but like you're using a more graphical environment. So maybe use like a brighter blue, like kind of like this maybe. I'd go like, sorry, I'm using my mouse right now because my other hand's holding the mic. Like this would be a good color to use because it's fitting with your environment. And that adds a lot more believability. Besides that, I think you did a pretty good job with the overall form of the face and the arm. But yeah, those are the things I feel like you can potentially fix. And also, I think the structure or design of the blade could be a little more accurate. Maybe you're following a different design, but assuming this is the correct design, like it feels like it's separated into how do I say, threes, right? So each of the segments here take up a third of the area of the blade, and so try to make that a little more accurate and right in perspective in your version, I guess. But maybe I could be looking at the wrong design, so yeah. But that's all I have to say. Hopefully this was helpful. But yeah,